Why is it so hard to be happy? You would think that with all the self-help books, podcasts, productivity tools, and self-improvement gurus out there, we would all be thriving right now. And yet, the data tells us a very different story. According to the World Health Organization, more than 280 million people worldwide currently live with depression, making it one of the leading causes of disability globally. At the same time, large-scale studies show that the rates of anxiety and psychological distress have been rising, especially among younger generations. Plus, alongside all of this, mental health researchers are increasingly talking about something else, a loneliness epidemic. So despite living in the most technologically connected time in history, studies are suggesting that people actually feel more isolated than ever. So clearly something is not adding up. If we have more knowledge, more resources, more self-help advice than any generation before us, why aren't we happier? In this video, I'm going to share with you what positive psychology and modern research have to say about happiness, why it can feel so difficult to maintain, but most importantly, what you can do practically and realistically to create a happier life. Before we dive in though, if this is your first time here on my channel, hi, hello, my name is Irene. I'm a mindful growth coach, creator, and positive psychologist. And here on this channel, we talk about all things mindful self-development, journaling, nervous system regulation, self-discipline, and a lot more. So if that's your vibe, make sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss any future videos. And if you want more resources to help you grow more mindfully, check out the Happiness Diaries Journal, my Instagram, as well as our Journal Cafe events over at Waves of Thoughts. And with that, let's get into it. One of the most uncomfortable truths about happiness is that life is hard. Being human means we will experience joy, connection, love, excitement, but it also means that we will experience stress, disappointment, grief, rejection, and uncertainty. You know, that is simply part of this human experience of ours. And large international data sets, such as the World Happiness Report, show that life circumstances do influence happiness and well-being. So happiness isn't just about fixing your mindset or thinking more positively. In fact, this idea has been criticized by lots of researchers and even creators. For example, filmmaker and YouTuber Matt D'Avella recently released a video called The Biggest Self-Help Lie, where he talks about how the industry oversimplifies happiness into just a mindset problem. And you know, actually there is some truth to that. So if happiness doesn't just come from thinking happier thoughts, what actually contributes to it? Psychologist Jonathan Haidt summarizes this idea into his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, using a very simple formula. H equals S plus C plus V, which means that happiness is influenced by three factors. Let's break those down. S, set point. This is your genetic foundation. And research using twin studies suggests that 30 to 50% of happiness variants may be influenced by genetics, which can include things such as temperament or personality. C, life conditions. And these can include factors such as your age, marital status, religion, income, health, culture, environment. And studies show that life circumstances do influence happiness, although it's actually less than we might assume, only up to 10%. And V, voluntary actions. This is a part that positive psychology focuses most on, because these are the behaviors and the actions that are within our control. So things like how we spend our time, what goals we pursue, or how we interpret challenges. And research actually suggests that these intentional actions can significantly influence happiness, up to 40%. Very interestingly, this framework closely mirrors research from positive psychologist Sonia Lyubomirsky, who proposed the happiness pie. This is where set range mirrors set point, life circumstances mirror conditions, and intentional activities mirror voluntary actions. Either way, both models defend that happiness isn't just something that you find, or also that if you have a less happy baseline, that you're completely doomed to live a happy life. Plus, ultimately, the percentages are actually completely irrelevant, as what matters the most is your own belief in agency. So your belief that your own actions can have a positive impact and meaningfully influence your happiness and your well-being. Most people believe that happiness is our natural state, but actually our brains were not designed for happiness. And to explain this, we have to go back a few years. Back in the day, our ancestors lived in a world completely full of danger. There were predators, food shortages, rival tribes, extreme weather. So the human brain evolved to being extremely good at detecting threats and thinking, is this safe? Is this dangerous? What could go wrong? Because if your brain was constantly scanning the environment for threats, then you were more likely to survive. And over generations, that created the mind that we have today. A mind that is constantly worrying about the future, replaying mistakes from the past, comparing ourselves to others, and also focusing too much on what we are missing. Except instead of predators, our minds are warning us about dangers like losing our jobs, sending the wrong email, embarrassing ourselves in public, getting rejected, and maybe even failing at something important. And this is what originated our negativity bias, the very well documented psychological tendency for our brains to pay more attention to negative experiences versus positive ones. So, moral of the story. Our brains are wired for problem solving, comparison, and threat detection, and not necessarily for enjoyment, for pleasure, and for happiness. Which means that if happiness can feel hard sometimes, that doesn't mean that you're doing life wrong. Your brain, your mind, it's just doing what it evolved to do. Another major misconception that I hear all the time is that happiness is the same as a pleasant feeling or a quick emotion. But actually, did you know that in positive psychology, there are two different types of happiness? The first one is called hedonic happiness. And this is what most people think when they hear the word happiness. So this is all about experiencing pleasure and positive emotions. So things like moments of joy, a yummy meal, watching a movie, laughing with friends, doing a hobby you love just because you love it. And these experiences do matter, as we will explore in just a little bit. Positive emotions are important for well-being, but also they are temporary. And research on hedonic adaptation shows that humans quickly get used to these positive changes. So even major life improvements like getting married, buying a house, or that job promotion often only lead to a short-term happiness increase. Which means that if we only rely on these short-term pleasurable emotions, we can end up chasing them constantly. For example, mindlessly scrolling on social media just to get one more dopamine hit. Or personal development where you keep raising the bar without actually celebrating all the steps you're taking and all of your achievements. Or even just the act of constantly buying the next material possession that promises you happiness. And it's ironic, but research also shows that the harder people try to feel good all the time, or the harder they hold on to that feeling, the more likely they are actually to experience anxiety and dissatisfaction. So the second type of happiness actually goes much deeper. It is called eudaimonic happiness, and it refers to living a meaningful and fulfilling life. So this is that kind of happiness that comes from pursuing meaningful goals, living according to your values, contributing to something larger than yourself, and growing into the person that you were always meant to become. This concept goes all the way back to Aristotle, who believed that a good life isn't about pleasure, but living in alignment with virtue and with purpose. And modern research does support this idea. Studies show that people who pursue meaning tend to experience higher and longer-term well-being than those who focus just on pleasure. But here is the key insight. A meaningful life does not eliminate difficult emotions. Because as we have talked about, in this human being experience, we are guaranteed to experience less pleasant emotions. You know, even in the most meaningful pursuits of our lives, such as building a career or raising a family, or pursuing completely deeply aligned goals, even in these moments, we are likely to experience stress, uncertainty, and challenges. So only expecting yourself to experience highs and very positive emotions all the time is actually only setting yourself up for disappointments. So if happiness isn't just about feeling good all the time, what does happiness actually look like? In this book, Flourish, by Martin Seligman, who is the father of positive psychology, he proposes a model called perma, in which includes 5 pillars for happiness and well-being. Little fun fact, this is a book that actually introduced me to positive psychology and to this new field of exploring and studying what actually makes life worth living. And this is the book that made me want to become a positive psychologist. But let's break this model down. P. Positive emotions. And again, I will highlight, this does not mean that you are avoiding negative emotions. In fact, there is no such thing as good or bad emotions. All emotions give us something. For example, what we tend to consider as bad emotions helps us with survival, learning, and self-reflection. And then what we think are good emotions help us to build relationships, to notice opportunities, and also to expand our creativity. And studies actually show that people who tend to experience a wider range of emotions also tend to have better psychological health. So the goal is what we call in positive psychology as emo diversity. Specifically, psychologist Barbara Fredrickson proposes that flourishing individuals tend to experience a ratio of roughly 3 positive emotions for every 1 negative emotion. So again, the goal is never to eliminate negative emotions, but to create some balance, because too many negative emotions can lead to chronic stress, rumination, depression. But too many positive emotions can also lead to higher risk-taking, lower inhibition, and also higher chances of mood instability, such as having manic episodes. E. Engagement. Engagement refers to the deep absorption in the task at hand. And a Hungarian psychologist, I will insert his name here because there's no way I'm going to attempt to pronounce this man's name. He called the state flow. You know, when you become fully immersed in whatever you're doing, that you completely lose track of time, that is flow. You might have heard the term flow, maybe even on social media, because of course, this term had to be repackaged into a tool for productivity and for performance. But originally, flow was studied as one of the most reliable pathways to happiness, well-being, and life satisfaction. And this optimal or flow experience tends to occur when these 3 elements are involved: a clear goal, immediate feedback, and a task that is somewhat challenging, so you feel excited to try something new, but not too challenging, so you feel demotivated and end up giving up. R. Relationships. Decades of research show that relationships are one of the strongest predictors of happiness. In fact, the famous Harvard study of adult development, which followed participants for 80 years, it concluded that the quality of our relationships is indeed the strongest predictor for happiness. We know that human beings are social beings. We thrive when we feel supported, connected, loved, and valued. So small actions like actively listening, expressing appreciation, expressing your gratitude, or sharing good news with someone that you trust can significantly strengthen our sense of connection and belonging. M. Meaning. Meaning comes from contributing to something larger than yourself. So this might include living in alignment with your values, helping others, creative work, spiritual practices, and community involvement. Humans have this deeply psychological need to find our purpose and to feel like our life and our actions matter in the grander scheme of things and in the larger story of the world. A. Accomplishments. Well-being also involves achievement through progress, mastery, and in a way, success too. But not success purely in a status-driven or external validation kind of way, but instead success that is defined subjectively by our values and what matters the most to us. So this might include going after meaningful goals, developing your skills or celebrating your progress, or just committing to long-term mindful growth. And together, these 5 elements form a very powerful framework for building long-lasting happiness. So instead of chasing quick moments of pleasure and more dopamine hits, happiness can be something deeper, more stable, and something that we can actually achieve through the way that we live, how we connect, and all the ways that we engage with the world. So when we step back a little bit and look at the science, a few things become clear. 1, happiness is not a one-size-fits-all. It is influenced by our biology, life circumstances, but also the actions that we choose to take. 2. Our brains were not designed for lasting happiness. And 3. A meaningful life will always include both joy and difficulty. But positive psychology also shows us that by intentionally focusing on emotional diversity, deep engagement, quality relationships, meaning, and accomplishments, we can gradually create a life that feels richer, deeper, and more fulfilling. Not perfect, but worth living. If you've watched the video until this point, I invite you to comment down below the star emoji to let me and others know that you're still here and that you're also on your mindful growth journey. And if you want more resources, check out the Happiness Diaries journal and also the Journal Cafe, which is our monthly community and journaling event over at Waves of Thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. I really hope that you have enjoyed today's video, and I will catch you in the next one.